That I can give you a laugh.
Yes.
The something.
The 15th.
All right, good morning, everybody. It is 10 a.m. Out of respect for everybody's time, I want to get started on time. It is Wednesday, September 2nd. It's 10 a.m. This is the Housing and Economic Development Committee of the Tompkins County Legislature. Welcome. We do have 3 members of the committee present, which is quorum. We have Legislator Packman and Hunt and myself. Legislator Sigler did let me know that he had something that came up this morning, and he may be able to be join us late or not at all, depending on how things go. And then we'll see if Adam Vincent is along here shortly. Changes to the agenda. There is one item that is not on the agenda that I would like to offer up as a member-filed resolution. I'm happy to bring this forward, and what we'll do is we'll put it down in housing. We'll put it under the report and discussion for Southern Tier 8. So because it's a late agenda, we'll put it towards the bottom. I need to get unanimous consent to add this to the agenda.
As long as there's no objection.
Okay. Is there any objection to adding? It's the resolution ID 14306, support of the Department of Planning and Sustainability to use budgeted funds for housing target market. Any objection? All right, seeing no objection, we'll take that up in the housing section of the agenda. We do have 2 public comments because it's good practice. I'll go ahead and read the rules for speaking under privilege of the floor. I agree to a 3-minute time limit. I agree not to raise my voice. I agree not to use lewd, obscene, profane, slanderous, or libelous language or speak or act in a manner that would tend to incite a breach of the peace. I agree not to speak about county personnel matters. Personnel matters include comments about job performance of named county employees and other elected officials. After 3 minutes, I agree to leave the microphone and yield the floor. Transferring time to another person is not permitted. I agree to be courteous and to make comments. I agree to be courteous and not make comments, gestures, outbursts, or other disruptions while other members of the public or legislators are speaking. I agree that if I cause a disruption and I'm asked to leave, I will leave the chambers. I think the first one we have is Teresa Alt, friend of the committee. Teresa, thank you for being here. And if you want to step up to the microphone, if you need, I can bring that down for you.
Greg, this one.
Okay.
Is this good?
Perfect.
Okay. I'm Teresa Alt, City of Ithaca. I heard the public report on the minimum wage study. Sure, we should adopt a significantly higher local minimum wage, if possible, at the level of a living wage. What are you telling people if you say they should work full-time, 40 hours a week, and not be able to live on it? Most of the problems seem to occur when the increase is not big enough. Sure, it would be nice if we could decrease the local cost of living by building more affordable housing, but that takes time. It costs a lot of money that probably has to come from the state, if not the feds. The minimum wage is a matter of political will. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Next up, Eric Carey. Eric, if you want to step up to a microphone. Thanks for being with us today.
Hi, thank you. My name is Eric Carey from Groton, New York. I'm here on regards to the minimum wage. I'm on also myself and on behalf of Farm Bureau. Chairman Mezey and members of the Housing and Economic Development Committee, my name is Eric Carey. I'm a dairy farmer from Groton and serve on the board of directors for Tompkins County Farm Bureau, the largest farm organization in the county representing nearly 160 members. I'm here today to voice our strong opposition to a proposed increase in the minimum wage by the Tompkins County legislature. Agriculture is one of the largest employers in the county. According to the USDA 2022 agricultural census, Tompkins County has nearly 93,000 acres of farmland, generating nearly $90 million in sales. Farming is a large part of the county's economy. While this is an impressive figure, farmers also see rising costs in fertilizer, fuel, and labor. Tariffs have also had a large negative impact on our farmers. New York's minimum wage is one of the highest in the nation. Farmers currently provide overtime pay to their employees. On our own farm, we have overtime for all of our employees, regardless of what they make hourly, and they also have all their housing paid for, all their utilities. When their utilities went over $1,000 a month, we paid it. Some of it was the employees had their heat set at 88 degrees, and I had to get after them, but stuff like that, you know, we pay for it, we eat it because they're good workers. Farm employers can receive a refundable tax credit from the state for overtime pay. Should the legislature increase the minimum wage, farmers would not be eligible for the additional tax credits from the state for the difference in wage rates. Will Tompkins County also be providing additional tax rebates to farmers? Tompkins County farmers are part of a global economy. They're selling their products locally, nationally, and internationally. Unlike other businesses, farm prices are set by the buyers, processors, and commodity markets. Farmers do not have the ability to increase their prices to absorb increased costs, including labor. Farmers will be at a competitive disadvantage with other counties nationally and globally if they face increased wage costs. An increased county minimum wage also creates a patchwork of rules and regulations. We have farms that cross county lines. If an employee from a farm in Cortland County is planting or harvesting crops in Tompkins County, will the farmer have to comply with the increased minimum wage while there? And that's very common, crossing county lines. Courts have consistently found the minimum wage is a matter of state authority, not local control. Local governments generally cannot set their own minimum wage rate when the state has established a uniform standard. Attempting to do so can result in legal challenges, uncertainty for employers and employees, and costly litigation to the county. The long-term impact of an increased minimum wage will result in a lack of competitiveness with other counties, states, and countries. It will also result in a loss of farms and conversion of land for non-agricultural purposes. This could lead to an increased community services that will ultimately require an increase in property taxes. For these reasons, Tompkins County Farm Bureau is opposed to an increase in minimum wage by Tompkins County. Thank you for allowing me to share our concerns this morning. If anyone would like a copy of what I had, I'm happy to hand it out.
Yeah, Eric, if you could provide one to Taylor, that would be great. Thank you so much. Teresa, if you had any other written comments too, if you wanted to submit, you're happy to share them with. That's okay. If you want to email them or anything, just I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity. To Taylor. Yeah, that would be great. Okay, anyone else for privilege of the floor? All right, seeing nobody else, we will move on. We do have a minutes approval. Iris and John, you guys are going to have a lot of heavy lifting because it's just the three of us. So somebody's going to have to move and somebody's going to have to second. I see moved by John, seconded by Iris. Any comments, suggestions, edits, corrections to the minutes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? All right, that passes unanimously. Next is a chair's report. I want to make sure that we have time for everything on the agenda and we have time for question and presentation, so I will skip a chair's report today. We have our county administrator's report. We have Deputy County Administrator Bridget with us. Bridget, good to see you.
Hi, good morning.
It was just a few hours ago we were right here.
We were just here.
We're just here. It's like Groundhog's Day this
Exactly.
week. Turn it over to you for anything county administration, and then we'll move on to the minimum wage study update.
Sure, thank you. So I do not have any additional report aside from the presentation we will hear from Dr. Ian Greer and his team. So in the interest of time, I think we can move right into that.
Great. We do have on the agenda a report and discussion for the county minimum wage study update. This is ID 14298. We're joined by Ian Greer, Industrial and Labor Relations CoLab is your employer at Cornell University. And we are also joined by David Bateman online. So Ian, I will turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, so we have
Need to share?
25 minutes. Yeah, I'm wondering what the easiest way is because I forgot my laptop.
I'll give this to you.
Okay.
And then you can use my.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it to David Bateman, who's going to sort of introduce the study, and then I'm going to talk about a few of the data analyses we did and sort of possibilities for the legislature. So David, you have the word.
Great. Thank you all very much. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you. My apologies that I can't be there in person. This is just the title slide. You can move ahead. So, this is just the background on the project. I expect most people in this room are very familiar with the background of the project. That's the county legislature passed a resolution in 2024. They had a request for proposals. The collab, as well as myself, I'm not part of the collab. I'm in the government department in the Brooks School of Public Policy, submitted a proposal, and in early 2026, the contract was signed. So we can answer any questions about the background, but I expect everybody in this room, most people in this room already know it. So you can move ahead. So the process, both sort of in the call, in the call, as well as in our proposal, was organized around a set of public convenings of stakeholders. So what they wanted us to do, and what we proposed to do, was bring together different stakeholder constituencies across a number of different sort of focused settings to explore as many of the issues involved and how a possible county minimum wage might impact the participants, the stakeholders, as well as the wider community. I think it's worth stressing at the outset that this was an extraordinarily civil and highly informative and thoughtful set of conversations, right? This is an issue that can be potentially very, people are passionate about, people are sort of energized about, they can be somewhat divisive in sort of how people feel this. They've divided perspectives on it, and yet everybody came engaged respectfully, civilly, in a way that was really quite remarkable. And so I just want to thank everyone who participated in it. We have a thank you slide at the end for the stakeholders who helped really bring people into the room. But in the interest of time, I'm going to leave that till the end. So the public convenings, those were sort of the anchor and the focus of the process. In response to conversations in those convenings, it was decided that we should also organize a series of focus groups. So these were organized in response to stakeholder interest in going deeper into particular issues. One other reason for the focus groups was because we wanted to make sure that we expanded the range of perspectives that we were hearing. We wanted to make sure that we had full coverage of the scope of issues that were coming up. We recognized that it was going to be difficult to get sort of perfectly balanced representation of stakeholder constituencies, given the sort of different backgrounds harder work schedules and so on, to get everybody into all the rooms. And so we wanted to make sure that we had other additional opportunities to engage with them. There were further possibilities for giving input. So we had a large number of comments in Qualtrics forms. These are surveys that came at the end of every convening and that were broadly available. And then we had individual interviews that were conducted as sort of a series of events over the course of the spring and summer. This was sort of intended to try and correct some of the imbalanced representation that we were missing. And then the summary feedbacks were sent out to the participants so that they could correct the record if possible, or if they saw anything that was needed to correct the record. And it was also another opportunity for them to make sure that their perspectives were heard. You can move forward. So there are 8 public convenings. March 24th was the launch event that was very well attended, and that generated a series of questions. There was a lot of engagement there, a lot of participation. A lot of people had a lot of questions about the process, as well as questions about the minimum wage. And a lot of the some of the subsequent convenings, as well as the focus groups, as well as some of the data that was collected and analyzed, was responsive to the things that came up there. April 8th, we had a data and statistics convening. On April 14th, we met with the Tompkins County Business Community and then the Lansing Business Alliance and Farm Bureau. On April 21st, we had a care economy convening as well as a public benefits convening. On April 28th, we had a youth employment convening. This was we decided to do this in response to stuff that we heard at the launch event, as well as several of the other meetings about sort of how a minimum wage might affect youth workers, young workers. And then on May 21st, we had a workers convening. There were 6 additional focus groups with the Manufacturers Alliance, Food Systems, with Racker Center Worker Focus Group, with TSD Botches, and with HR professionals and the Southside Community Center staff. Right? So there were ways to make sure that we had good, broad representation of the scope of issues from as many stakeholders as possible. 11 recorded testimonies and 73 written submissions. We had a higher number of ultimate Qualtrics submissions, but there was some number of those that had nothing in them, I think. Report. So I'm just going to include my bit by sort of talking about some of the main themes that came up during these convenings. Right? So one of the things that I think is most striking is for whatever disagreements there might be about the minimum wage, there was broad agreement that the cost of living in Tompkins County is very high. This places a burden on nearly everyone. It places different types of burdens, but sort of broadly, everyone is impacted by this. It impacts low-wage workers very heavily. It impacts local businesses because the cost of living in Ithaca, in Tompkins County, is also related to the cost of doing business in Tompkins County, and it impacts small nonprofits. Right? So there was a consistent message. While our focus was on the role of the minimum wage, there was a broad theme that the minimum wage could be part of a broader, could be understood as a tool within a broader set of approaches that the county might be interested in tackling the basic problem of the cost of living. The problem, the convenings, they generated a series of questions that we'll get to. Are high costs a problem in rural areas as well? Right? The rent tends to be lower there than in Ithaca. I mean, yet there are spillover effects and there are high commuting costs. Are low wages really a problem for younger workers? This is something that came up in one of the reasons we held the youth employment convening. Are they a problem for all older workers? Many older workers are living off retirement income or are working largely as a way to sort of remain social and active, or part-time caregivers who might be supported by spouses. So those were some of the questions that came up out of these convenings. So we're going to place the broad sort of understandings about the potential benefits of county-wide minimum wage into sort of 3 broad categories. We'll do the same with the potential costs. So what we heard from workers, as well as many people who were interested or supportive of a county-wide minimum wage, is that it would just make Tompkins County much more livable for more of its residents, helping to compensate for the high cost of living. So we heard over and over that the current minimum wage does not cover the basics for those who are earning it. Another sort of less appreciated benefit of a higher minimum wage that we heard was the time and flexibility it would allow low wage workers, right? So low wages waste time and effort. And you can think about this, how this might impact something like a health crisis or a family crisis that comes up. All of a sudden you have to cut back hours, make choices around that are really high stakes decisions because you're working at such thin margins that you really can't afford to lose those hours, but you also need to be there for people. They interfere with family life, with education, the possibility of sort of developing skills and otherwise. So other unpaid life activities, right? The quality of life generally, but also sort of the ability to make optimal choices for people is impacted by would be positively impacted by a countywide minimum wage. Then we also heard that there would be benefits to the wider community. Those would include reduced inequities, especially along lines of race, as well as the improved spending power of communities more generally. Go ahead. So we also heard about potential costs of countywide minimum wage. So we think that those could also be sort of categorized into 3 major themes. The first were cost to the community. Inflation, higher prices, potentially those prices were passed on to businesses or passed on to consumers, and that was a major driver of prices. Potentially reduced economic activity, for instance, the businesses had to close. Loss of workers in publicly funded or grant-based care work. This is something that came up in the convenings on the 21st, especially that for grant-based care work, they often receive grants or they receive grants that have been pegged to an existing expectation of the minimum wage, and so that they might not be able to quickly update those. So cost to workers was the second major category. So there was various people raised the possibility that workers might be let go, that workers would then cease to be eligible for various benefits. Some people raised the possibility that a higher minimum wage would lead to work intensification. And a result of work intensification, workers might suffer injuries from this. And that there might be less hiring. If there were job losses, there might be less hiring of vulnerable and marginalized workers in particular. and as well as potential problems for youth employment programs. And then the third category was sort of cost to businesses themselves. So higher costs relative to competitors outside Tompkins County. We just heard some examples of this from the Farm Bureau. Higher costs relative to competitors outside of Tompkins County. A harder time recruiting workers, right? So if you are currently paying above the minimum wage, but it no longer is above the minimum wage, if the minimum wage goes up, you might have a harder time recruiting workers from elsewhere. And potentially lower morale for skilled and experienced workers due to wage compression. If you feel that you are currently making a salary that is attractive because it's above the minimum wage, as the minimum wage approaches that, what is the wage compression that occurs and what does that do to the morale of the workforce? And I'm going to pass it now over to Ian. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, David. So I'm going to provide as thorough an overview as I can in the time I have. And I'm going to talk about kind of research and data that deals with some of the questions that came up in the convenings. There's a more thorough treatment of it in the report. So this is a high-level overview. So the problem, which we've been tracking using data for a long time, is a cost of living that is increasing more rapidly than the minimum wage. It's a higher cost of living in Tompkins County relative to other counties in upstate New York. It's very high income inequality in Tompkins County, higher than the United States overall or anywhere else in upstate New York. And extreme disparities by race in wages, which kind of shocked me the first time I've figured out what those disparities were. So are wages keeping up with the cost of living? So according to some data you might look at, yes, the median wage has increased since 2018 at the same rate as the consumer price index for the Northeast. The problem with that is that CPI is based on data for multiple states, is not based on local data. The applicable minimum wage has gone up even faster than CPI, twice as fast. But look at this, the living wage number, which is based on local cost of living data, that has gone up much faster than the consumer price index, much faster than the median wage, and even faster than the applicable minimum wage. So one of the questions that legislators had was, well, how does the problem of the cost of living vary across the county? And I thought we wouldn't be able to find out, but thankfully I talked to some people who work for the county who work with data, and they sent me this product that has the two highest items for the cost of living, housing and transportation, and it breaks them down into very fine geographical units and compares them to average wages, average incomes, sorry. And here we see that it is, that the cost of living is high both in rural and urban parts of the county. It's quite variegated, but yeah, in general, this is something that affects all kinds of different geographies in the county. Another question was how many workers' wages would be affected. So we were instructed not to look at a particular minimum wage level. So we looked at this at multiple different minimum wage levels. And I mean, the reality is that there are thousands and thousands of workers' wages that are pretty close to the minimum wage. So even a small minimum wage increase would affect quite a few people. Different data sets give you different numbers, and we talk about that in the report. This is the main data set we use, American Community Survey. It would have an impact on a lot of people. So which workers' wages would be affected? Well, disproportionately Black and Hispanic workers. It would also affect almost half of white workers if you increased it to 2508. Of course, that is really the high end of estimates that we look at, minimum wage increases that we looked at. But this just shows how the disparities in the impact, both of low wage work and in minimum wage increases. And which industries? Well, it's the ones you would expect that disproportionately rely on workers making less than a living wage. It's the vast majority of workers in accommodation and food service, and retail, and agriculture. But an even bigger group would be people in education services in school districts and universities. Even though the percentage is smaller, this is the dominant sector in our county, and that would affect thousands of workers if we had a minimum wage increase. Do low earners really need higher wages? So this forced us to do additional analyses to see kind of, to look more at the household incomes of people making below a living wage. The suspicion was, well, many low earners are actually in households that are not impoverished. So here we see that there are about 7,000 low earners under 200% of the federal poverty line. And so that's more than a third of the low earners are in low income households. There was a question about the age distribution. I was quite surprised to see how few teenagers are working in the county. Of course, they are overwhelmingly making less than a living wage, but it's just over 300 people. There are a lot of people, there's a much larger group, 18 to 24, 7,000 workers, as you would expect. I was a little surprised by the relative small numbers of people over 65, at least the share of people over 65 making less than a living wage. Actually, if you're above 65, you're relatively unlikely to make less than a living wage. We found that about a quarter of 16 to 24-year-olds earning low wages are living with parents. That's about 2,000 people, so most of them are on their own. And we sort of flipped it to say, well, how many low earners have to support children in their own household? And that's about 4,000 people. Another way to think about this is, well, what is the relationship between hourly wages and household income? Well, it turns out that having low wages is strongly associated with living in a low-wage household. There are very few people in low-income households that are making above a living wage, certainly in the bottom 20% of the income distribution. And the vast majority of people in the top 30% of the income distribution are making above a living wage. So low wages are definitely related to poverty and the risk of poverty. One of the questions that comes up everywhere where minimum wage is debated is, will jobs be cut? And we had a presentation by Professor Justin Blesch from the economics department, and he provided an overview of studies on employment effects of minimum wage increases. And he pointed out that estimates are all over the place. It really depends on what industry you're talking about. If you're talking about farming, there's going to be a much bigger negative effect than if you're talking about some industry aimed at local markets like retail or food service that has the ability to pass the costs onto customers. Or if you're talking about higher education, where that is not as price sensitive as manufacturing and agriculture. But you see there are studies that find a positive impact of employment by minimum wage increases. This is largely due to increasing spending power of wage earners. And then we see some with big negative impacts on employment. So one of the questions was, what has happened in other similar communities with city and county minimum wages? This came up in response to these estimates of employment impacts of minimum wage increases that are, many of the studies are carried out in big cities or suburban areas which are some of the locales where there have been local minimum wage increases. But there are some smaller places that are not part of major metro areas. Some of them are even college towns that have had local minimum wages. And I apologize for the big complicated table here, and you can look at it more closely when you look at the report, but there's no clear pattern here of the minimum wage increase either leading to economic problems or improved local economies. So you can take a look at this. Some, like Palo Alto, has had problems. Other locales, Boulder, Bellingham, Santa Fe, have not. Flagstaff, some of them have quite high minimum wage levels, like Flagstaff has $17.85, Palo Alto $18.20, Bellingham $17.66. Will prices go up? So all this too depends on what industry you're talking about. In general, it is, the biggest one is food away from home, so eating out. The thing is, there's one-for-one cost-weighted pass-through through price increases, and the impact on consumers really depends on how much of the cost goes to the lowest earners. So it's really big in food away from home. It's small in just about everything else. What about benefits cliffs? Will workers experience a net loss of income due to losing benefits? This has been a big topic throughout my time looking at living wage and minimum wage. We know that there are people who will lose their benefits, and some of them, the value of benefits lost is not going to be compensated by the amount of income that they get from a minimum wage increase. The thing is, this is a small number compared to the people whose incomes increase as a result of the minimum wage. So it's about 2 to 4%, according to these simulations we did a few years back, who really face benefits cliffs. So this is something that the county is going to have to think about, and DSS can kind of think about how much it would cost to make sure that people really benefit from minimum wage increases. So that's it for the data. Now, we were also asked to talk a bit about what the options are. One thing is, do we create a countywide minimum wage or not? That is one of the questions for the legislature. If so, then how does one set its level? So a common way to do this is set a target as a percentage of median wage. This is what many countries do. Another approach, if you're thinking about cost of living, is to set it in relation to the living wage calculation. Another way to think about it, like Bellingham, Washington, is an add-on to the state minimum wage. So in Bellingham, it's $2 over the state minimum wage. How does one adjust it from year to year? So we heard from a lot of employers that if there is a minimum wage, it should increase slowly and predictably so that they can adjust. But there's also a question, how do you adjust it in relation to the cost of living? As we saw earlier, the main inflation indicator goes up much more slowly than the cost of living indicators that we have for Tompkins County. So CPI would be a relatively slow increase. Third question, will there be carve-outs? So there are a number of questions about tipped wage, training wage. So that's one thing that I guess you all talk about. I guess there's another consideration, which is, do you want to have a patchwork of rules, or do you want to have a unified level playing field? And also, do you want to address inequities? Because these carve-outs are going to reinforce existing historical inequities that we have in this country and this county. And then there are a series of concerns that need to be addressed, but not through the design of a minimum wage policy. There was the question of tax credits for agriculture that came up. There's also a question how we invest in higher wages in care work. It's a question of how do we address the freeze in funding in youth employment programs. And there's a question of benefits cliffs. How do we make sure that that low-income families benefit? So the materials that we're going to give to the legislature are the summary report, which is currently under review. We've got summaries of convenings and focus groups, and we're waiting for final corrections from participants, and those will be appended to the summary report. We have recordings of the public convenings, which are in a SharePoint folder that Bridget created. Then there are additional written comments that came in mostly through the online Qualtrics form, but also some through emails. And then we have the materials from convenings, slide decks, and some of the key studies that were cited. This is a list of the stakeholders who made this possible, and I'm super grateful. And it was also just really interesting to talk with them before the convenings to figure out just what is going on with their members. And it includes employers, it includes workers, it includes public sector entities, it includes the care economy. And this was just kind of an incredible study. And thank you so much, Tompkins County, for commissioning it. Okay.
Well, that was great. And very efficient, which we appreciate here at the legislature. I guess I want to first extend thanks. I'll take a leap here and say on behalf of the committee. The rest of our colleagues haven't had an opportunity to see this presentation yet. So, one of my biggest concerns going into this, that it wasn't going to be a robust and engaging conversation. And I think that you and your team are to be commended for creating a space where all sides of the conversation could present and could feel like they could share. And if there was a level of discomfort, that they could reach out separately and provide comments or feedback. Because I know sometimes for all sides, which I think there's more than one or two of this conversation, people sometimes are hesitant to speak publicly about this. And I think you all did a really good job trying to take cast a wide net and a balanced approach. And this is a topic that can sometimes come with a charge. Some may say it's political, some may say it's social activism, some may say it's capitalistic, right? Whatever the charge may be, it comes charged. And I think you did a very good job in the process trying to pull that back in a way so that it was really a community conversation. And I think we are better for it. I think this gives us a lot to consider and discuss and mull over. But I do want to thank you and your team for doing a job that I personally didn't think was possible. So you've got a convert here as it relates to the process and methodology. I think you all are to be commended, so thank you for that. With that, I would open it for comments or questions. I'm looking at Legislator Packman to kick us off because she usually does. But if anybody else wants to jump in ahead or have any other questions, please, this is the time for the committee to discuss. John, Adam, anything?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So based on the testimony from the Farm Workers Bureau, I wonder if agricultural workers could be excluded from this and still have a minimum wage set for other workers.
So again, I think as we decide as a committee what we want to do with this report, and how we want to structure the conversation. This is something that I guess I'll put that sort of in the parking lot of things to discuss. As once this gets presented to the full legislature, we'll probably get a sense of the body on how or which direction to have some of these conversations, and that's a good item to, are there workers such as youth workers or farm workers or other sectors that may be carve-outs. That's definitely something to consider. So a good question. Iris.
I was just letting others have the first swing, because I could go on this. Yeah, thank you, everyone, but especially Ian and David. I know you guys did a ton of work. I was able to attend a bunch of the convenings, and then also the presentation last week at the library, which was a great chance for more community engagement. I am curious to John's question about carve-outs, if that's something that came up at all in the research or the focus groups, and what, sort of the findings, if any, you have on those questions.
There are a lot of questions about carve-outs and thoughts about them, and cities vary and counties vary their minimum wages based on all kinds of things, business size, different industry. There's some cases where industries get special higher minimum wages. There are training wages, tip wages. One of the things that I'm going to send you all is an update that comes out every year from National Employment Law Project, and that is sort of a compendium of sort of minimum wage policies from around the country, and it kind of shows you all the different things that that cities and counties and states are doing. I think there's a real dilemma here, actually. So on the one hand, lots of people have ideas for addressing their concerns by exempting certain groups. On the other hand, there's also a desire to avoid having a complex patchwork of wage rules that is hard to understand and difficult to enforce. And there's also the thing about existing inequities by gender and race, which historically have been reinforced by things like tipped wages. And so, this is not, all I can do is put in front of you what information on what other places are doing, and also what we've heard from the stakeholders. And certainly there will be a lot for you to work with there. It's in the summaries of the convenings, and maybe you can even find more if you listen to the actual recordings.
Thank you. Can I go to Irene and then we'll come back? Is that? I see Legislator Weiser's on the screen. Irene, give you an opportunity. You got to go off mute. We're still saying that in 2026. It's amazing.
I know it is. Sorry about that. I too was at the first convening, and then also the report at the library, and I just want to commend you guys again for this report. It really is. I appreciate all the work that went into it, all the different kinds of stakeholders that you reached out to, and I think you've done a really nice job of pulling it together. I have one question and then a much broader suggestion, and maybe I'll start with the suggestion because that's just there, and then we're done with it, and then you can answer my question. My suggestion is that my brain is full right now with looking at the budget. I think there's a lot to deal with in this report, and I'd love to see going forward a working group that digs in and really starts to think about what we can do with it and what we can move forward with. So that's my suggestion. My question is, I guess there's two. One has to do with the wage compression issue and whether there's any suggestions on how to handle that, and the other has to do with comments that I've heard, and actually we can see this in the way that the living wage is currently calculated in the county, whereas it used to take into account the benefits that were provided. And so there were actually two different slots of living wages, one with benefits and one without. And I wondered, this seems to, whether there's a way to take that into account as we look at your data as well. So those are the two questions: wage compression and benefits as part of the overall living wage analysis or minimum wage analysis.
Yeah, so I'll keep it with minimum wage, since that's what this is about. The living wage calculation, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, fair. That's fair.
Okay, so wage compression. Wage structures in the county are becoming increasingly compressed, and they will continue to be increasingly compressed, and the compression will accelerate to the extent to which there is a rapid minimum wage increase. That's just going to happen, and employers and unions and others will try to address that by pushing up wages above the minimum wage level. So yeah, compression is happening, and arguably it is unfair and expensive to deal with. Also, one hears that it is good to have more equality in the labor force, so yeah, we hear different views about that, but it's definitely happening. In terms of non-wage compensation, I do not know how you design a minimum wage that takes into account what employers are doing to pay for people's health care, for housing, for retirement savings. That is just not part of the design of minimum wages. So, I mean, I can continue to look around, but minimum wages are about wage compensation, and I mean there are other things that that the public sector does to support things that, other aspects of compensation, like encouraging retirement savings or single-payer health care or any number of things. But yeah, that is a different area of policy than minimum wage.
Okay. Is there any way to look at the gap between the highest paid employees and the lowest paid, and is there any way of setting a minimum wage or a maximum percentage gap, or I don't know, is anybody doing something like that?
So the main way that a really common thing is setting it in relation to the median wage, and so if there are lots of people making high wages, the median wage will be higher, and if that group increases in size, then the median wage goes up, and that's what we have seen. And so the idea would be you would set it in relation to what's happening higher up in the wage distribution. So that's a pretty common way. A more niche way, but which is even more, or less common way, which is even more sensitive to what is going on at the very top, is to set it in relation to the average wage, because the average is that goes up more rapidly if you have really high earners. It's very sensitive to changes at the very top. So, you know, those are kind of the two main ways that you can do it to think about the wage structure. The thing about median wage is it tells you the bite, it tells you the number and percentage of people who are workers whose wages are affected. So I think that's why it is used so much, but most places that use it are countries with much lower levels of income inequality than we have here.
Do we have a sense of the income inequality within Tompkins County?
Yes.
And the highest and lowest earners?
I mean, so there will be, I'll have to look at the report and see how much data we provide, but using the wage data, we have other researchers track the Gini coefficient. That's the main measure of income inequality. So ours is, oh gosh, I can't remember the number. It is shocking. It's higher than the US overall. It's higher than anywhere else in upstate New York. It is, last time I looked, it was similar to Honduras and Angola. It's still lower than New York City. New York City is the same, is close to the same as South Africa, the most unequal country in the world. I think they have a Gini coefficient of 65. But yeah, we can provide more detail on levels of income inequality and the distribution of the wage structure. That's all pretty easy to find.
Okay, great, thanks.
We have also Legislator Wakeman on Zoom as well. Dan?
Great, good morning. Thank you for having me in. I appreciate it. And thank you to the team for putting this report together. It's reflective of a lot of work, and there's a lot of thought process here and a lot of opinions. I concur with both Iris about a list of exemptions or exceptions that we as a legislature are going to need to deal with if we consider this. That may not be a list that your team generates. It might come from elsewhere, but we will need that list and need to think about it. And also, I agree with Irene about wage compression. That is a significant thing that at least needs to be thought about. My question here is whether or not the team, because I didn't see it, I've been through most of the report. I haven't been through all of it, I'll admit that. Whether or not the team had considered how much of an additional workforce will be pulled in, and what that either raw number or percentage might be, or what the influence that would have on the unemployment rate that is specific to Tompkins County.
So it is hard to make predictions, and the economics literature that looks at the employment effects of minimum wage increases finds effects all over the place. Some studies find negative effects, some studies find positive effects. Most studies find quite small overall effects. I mean, it's interesting that we sometimes hear that there would be more commuting due to minimum wage increase, because that would mean that our low-paying industries would be more competitive than those in neighboring counties, and at least when it comes to attracting workers. And given the economic structure of our county, dominated by higher ed and service sectors, I would not expect a big overall negative impact on employment. There might even be a positive impact, but then the question is, well, what exactly is the magnitude? And that if there is a big positive effect, then what policies do we have to deal with that? But yeah, there's uncertainty. We don't know the answer to that, but it's something that comes up.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was something that had seen an analysis from elsewhere, because certainly if I'm in an adjacent county and I'm going to make more money by commuting a little bit into Tompkins, that's going to happen. All right, thank you.
One way to think about, just a quick thought on this is, one way to think about this is that on the one hand, if there's increased commuting into Tompkins County, then the wage increase that those workers get will, for the most part, probably be spent outside of Tompkins County. But on the other hand, it alleviates many employer concerns about difficulty in recruitment, so that it makes it easier to recruit from a different, slightly larger pool.
Thanks, Dan. I have one question I think it sort of ties into this a little bit. And then I have Iris and John. But I guess I'll ask my two questions now. Do we know the total number of the workforce in Tompkins County, and then the percentage of that reside in Tompkins County? Because as we talk about the affordability of living here, there are many who work here, would be my guess, just based on anecdotal information. This is not backed by any data, but that many commute into Tompkins County to work. I ask this because we don't really have, this is the Housing and Economic Development Committee, and I think we'll find out by our housing study, or at least know by our snapshot, we don't have enough housing. And so are we trying to attract more people to live here? Are we trying to attract more people to work here? And so what percentage of our workforce actually does reside here in these, I guess, lower tier or the median or below, which is, I believe, the area that this would be trying to address. So how much of an impact of the workforce are actually residents versus how many are residents outside? Because if they're outside, the same affordability issues, I would ask, are they the same, if they live in a surrounding county as those that live in Tompkins? And I think we could see that by living wages in other counties being different than the living wage in Tompkins County. So how do we wrestle with that, and what data is available to try to answer some of those questions?
Well, David West just stepped to the table. Like the last I checked, there were just under 50,000 people employed in Tompkins County. About 43 or 44,000 of them were wage earners, not self-employed, not business owners, and we had net in commuting. So if you subtract the people who are commuting out, we have net in commuting of about 12,000. So these 43 or 44,000 wage earners, these are people who live and work here, and then we have thousands more coming in. And so David and team track that, we track that, and yeah, it's a big part of the workforce.
Commutes in.
Yeah.
David West, who's in our planning department here at the county, just joined the crowd.
So in our snapshot, we have 2022 numbers, which was 13,522 commute out of the county, 21,975 live and work in the county, and 20,651 commute into the county. So mirroring, I think, very closely what he just said.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. That's helpful. And then the last question I had was on the benefits cliff slide. It looked like the research stopped at $15. Does it, is there correlation, or is there a plan to look at, because obviously the New York State minimum wage is above $15 at this point, probably when the research was done it was not. But how would that cliff change, or have you modeled any of that out preliminarily to see what that chart looks like above that $15 range?
We have not redone those calculations because it was a lot of work.
I believe it.
And it's so complicated and so hard to figure out. I think what is going on is for most people are just not affected. Their household income increases with wage increases because they're not getting much in the way of benefits. Even if they are low income, these benefits are undersubscribed. And then there's a relatively small number who are potentially affected, and they need a substantial wage increase to compensate for it for the most part, because they're getting multiple benefits and they have kids, and so we were able to say a bit about the demographics and size of that group for upstate New York. And because of data problems, we couldn't do it for Tompkins County. Yeah, I'm happy to talk with DSS about trying to quantify that for Tompkins County and figure out if we can update the actual number. I mean, I think that we would come to a pretty similar finding if we did the analysis again, because what we find is the more rapidly the minimum wage goes up, the more people's wages are affected, but that group that is claiming multiple benefits and is with DSS, that group remains of roughly the same size or maybe shrinks a bit as some of them get enough income from wages to compensate for lost benefits.
So one of the reasons too I asked this, and I'm a little curious, is the national or sort of the federal and state landscape around the social safety nets are rapidly changing. We can have a political conversation later. And I think it would be interesting to try to understand how those changes would also impact, because at the time the study was done, the social safety net landscape was different than what's being, proposed or try to push through today. Again, I don't ever want to be a researcher in this area because I know it's incredibly complex, and kudos to you all for trying to figure this out. But I think, as we as a legislature also look at the social safety net services that we provide as a county, and we try to understand to what level we need to provide those two, statutorily, and then from a policy standpoint, do we go above and beyond what's required at a minimum? What are some of those impacts? So I'm sure it's too early because there's not data out there yet about some of the changing landscape, but
no, that's going to be a huge job to study, and I've been talking with Cornell Cooperative Extension about studying that, because that's something they are thinking about. I mean, to the extent that the changes make these benefits even more undersubscribed than they are now, they will make benefits cliffs less a problem for a smaller share of the workforce, and people will depend more and more on wages for income who previously would have gotten benefits. So that's just my guess, but hopefully we will be able to do proper research about that. And I'm sure there will be national studies that will have nice data about that. Here it will be tougher in our small area.
Sure, thank you. Legislator Packman and then Hunt.
Okay, I have a list. Okay, just to answer the Gini question, brief research, it looks like Tompkins County's Gini coefficient is 0.493, which is incredibly high. The US, to put it in perspective, is 0.418. Germany is 0.324, Japan 0.323, the UK 0.324. So we're talking about pretty high inequality. It's equivalent or similar to countries like Mozambique, Panama, and the Republic of Congo. So high inequality, higher than our country's inequality. And we're talking about wage compression. So I do want to harken back to Teresa's comments. So thank you, Teresa. The idea of wage compression is if you raise people's wages from the bottom, then they're going to be earning closer to people above them. And that is a problem, I think, is usually wage compression is presented as a problematic idea. But when we're looking at our Gini coefficient of 49.3%, right, we're saying there's huge inequality between people at the bottom and people at the top. And so when I look at that, I don't see wage compression as a negative. I see it as trying to address some significant inequalities that we have right now. I think there's also, it gets to a fundamental belief that certain people and certain jobs they do should not be livable. That your work is so devalued, even if you're working full-time or 2 jobs, you shouldn't be able to survive on that because we don't think that your work is worthy of surviving. And because we do not have nationalized health care and a lot of other safety nets, a lot of that does fall to employers. That's the way we've structured things in our society, right, in this country. So it does ultimately fall to, well, then if you don't have a job, then you probably don't have benefits and you probably don't have retirement and you don't have a lot of things set up for you. So I do think it's worth us taking a moment and reflecting on what that means, and is it necessarily a problem if people who can't get by working a full-time job are now able to get by a little bit better. And I was in the worker forum convening where workers came and talked about the kinds of sacrifices that it means to work a minimum wage job. They don't get to go out with friends, right? They can't afford to go get a drink, to go hang out, go to a movie. I mean, just like things that people who haven't grown up in that or lived that experience take for granted. But there's a constant layer of stress that comes from not being able to relax, not being able to know that you're secure. If one shoe drops, like your car has a problem, or your energy bill went up, right? Because we're all seeing that you aren't actually gonna be able to get by. And I mean, I have lived that. I know that experience, so I am speaking from some level, but I also think there's just empathy, right, that we can have. That if you feel like you can't go out with your friends, either because you have to work 2 jobs, at night, you don't have time, or because you literally don't have $20 to go socialize, like that is a big cost, right? And no, that's a small thing in the scope of people's lives, but there's childcare choices that people have to make. There's job choices, there's housing choices. I mean, there's just so many things. So the idea that wage compression is this big scary concern to me is problematic, because what we're talking about is some people who are now living in poverty and working really hard, maybe not having to live in quite so much poverty. And maybe the wage spread that we're seeing right now, the inequality, is part of the problem, and not so much that people at the bottom shouldn't make a little bit more. So that's obviously a fundamental approach in how one views things, and that's my perspective. I do also want to address this idea of valuing non-wage compensation, which I know is a question I asked during the forums as well. And I had a helpful conversation with someone who said, look, you can't eat a pension, you can't eat healthcare, right? Like there's certain benefits that are offered that aren't gonna make your basic needs met. And also I think there's a concern that a lot of benefits, especially in these really low wage jobs, are not actually affordable. So maybe an employer offers healthcare, but there's no way you can really afford it on a minimum wage paycheck or just above minimum wage paycheck. And so I think if we're wanting to consider some way of valuing benefits, we need to look at, are they meaningful? Are they affordable at the wage that people are being given? So simply offering coverage is not enough, right? It has to be affordable based on your current salary and your hours too. And I also had heard this comment and concern from employers that, we don't want people to fall off the benefits cliff, but also you should give us valuation for the compensation, the benefits that we provide. And so how can you have it both ways? How can you both say that you're concerned people are going to lose their public benefits, but also you as an employer offer good benefits? If your employees are on public benefits, it's because those are better than the employer benefits. So I don't see how you can have it both ways. Either your benefits are good enough and have a real value and are accessible at your wage, or your employees are on public benefits because those are a lot better. So you can't both value your offering, but also be upset that your employees are gonna fall off public benefits and then now you're gonna have to start picking up. Again, because we don't have a social safety net of Medicaid for all, like we don't have that option for people, but it is, relies on unemployment to have healthcare for most people. Okay, then on the idea of carve-outs, sorry, I have a list. As a labor lawyer by training and as a student of ILR school, I remember learning about the passage of the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. These laws have carve-outs for farm workers, and those were passed during the New Deal era. And the reason there were carve-outs for farm workers is because they needed to get the Southern Democrats on board, and they were farmer owners, and they didn't want to have their workers covered. And at the time, those were also largely workers of color, largely Black workers in the South. This has had major consequences for the 90-ish years since these laws were passed in terms of inequities in the way the farm workers have been treated. I know that New York State now has some farm worker organizing, but again, there's many decades before where that was not allowed. And so I'm very wary of any laws that are going to sweepingly carve out whole swaths of employment groups, especially people who have generally been marginalized both by our laws and in our systems. So I just want to put that in there for context. I do think one thing that came out of the CARE convening that I went to that was really helpful was talking about, are there ways that the state could potentially help support if we were to raise the minimum wage? How do we kind of pick up to make it feasible? And so I think one of the things we can look at is, are there ways we can try to have the state change some laws? Obviously, that's not fully in our hands, but one thing was talking about increasing childcare subsidies, because the subsidy amount is fixed. And so if we raise the wages and that raises wages for the care workers, those are going to be passed on to the parents, the guardians who are paying that. And so if we can increase the subsidies, that would help. On the flip side, making the care workers Medicaid eligible, so that instead of them having to try to get through their employers, and there's just no way to fit that in. So that's something we can look at. I'm interested in learning more about this farm worker overtime compensation as well. Is that something that we could look at to try to get an increase? And then just thinking about next steps, I don't want this to just die in committee. I don't think that, we did a study, that's great, but let's keep this momentum going. I don't know if that means we need to have a working group or where we're gonna go from here, but I do think that we need to start moving into concrete ideas, discussing templates, whether it is looking at, different dollar amounts as potential proposals, looking at the carve-outs that people have mentioned, or do we have subcategories? I think that's all really important. And then I do have a question for you, Ian, which was for the benefits cliff issue. I couldn't remember, but what % of workers, if say we went all the way to the living wage, what % of workers were falling off the benefits cliff? I feel like it was in that 2 to 3% range. And is that of all workers, or is that workers earning below before?
So that's a percentage of workers whose wages are affected, or it's actually a percentage of households. With okay. A worker whose wages is affected by a minimum wage increase.
So if the wage increased, 97 to 98% of workers who are earning below, households with workers in them, would benefit from it and would not fall off the benefits cliff.
That's what we found out, yeah.
Okay, because I feel like we are getting stuck on that 2 to 3%. And if you're seeing 97 to 98% of households benefiting from a policy change, to me, that's overwhelming evidence that that is a positive policy change. I wouldn't want to say that because 2 to 3% of households might be negatively impacted, we shouldn't benefit 97 to 98% of households. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Okay, some of my questions or comments are tangential to both Greg and Iris at some point. I learned that Gini is spelled G-I-N-E-N-I. I had no idea, no knowledge of that prior to this discussion today. And that 0 means the country or the region has perfect equality, and 1 means they have perfect inequality. So we're at about the 50% level of being unequal. I'm curious if the Gini data is based on where people work, in other words, whether or not they actually work in Tompkins County, or where they live by county. Is it separated?
The answer is it uses the American Community Survey, so it's people who live in the place. So it's not place of
not people who work in Tompkins County, people who live in Tompkins County.
Yeah, so it's the incomes of everyone who lives in different counties. That's how you generate that number.
Okay, thank you. Second thing, just a thought, and it's sort of related to what some of the things that Iris was just talking about. In the group of low-wage workers, what do they need the most help with? Is it childcare? Is it food? Is it rent, for example? And did that come up during the meetings for this study? Because that's actually where we can help without even changing the living wage or the minimum wage, because we do help provide some of those supports.
So we heard about all kinds of things increasing the cost of living. We know that the two biggest items are housing and transportation. We know that, I mean, okay, I suspect that the big increase in next year's living wage calculation is going to be healthcare and anything that's affected by energy prices, which would be both rent and it would go both into the rent and the transportation numbers.
So if transportation's a big thing and we're still just looking at people who live in Tompkins County, they're talking about transportation within Tompkins County. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, the data is about people who live in Tompkins County. That is what our cost of living calculation is based on. We don't look at people who work here but live elsewhere.
So could I jump in quickly in one quick response to that? That from my recollection from what we heard from workers, that while they were very aware of and concerned about price increases in this area and that area and that area, it was a sort of comprehensive effect for them in which the main thing was going to be a wage would allow them flexibility, ability to make choices, and ability to respond to unexpected events that happen maybe in any one of these domains. The other thing that we did hear across many convenings was we focused on the minimum wage. That was our intent, but I think those who support a minimum wage increase as well as those who might have been opposed to it, all want the legislature to look broadly at the cost of living.
David, that is an excellent segue into, I think, my final comment, and then we'll wrap this up. I think as legislators, we have to remind ourselves what are the levers in which we have to pull and how we can affect and impact our community. We just kicked off a process, the county budget process, which is a tax levy that we impose on the community. And I think we need to keep affordability top of mind as one of those levers. We are also an employer in the county, and some of these conversations would have an impact on us and those. Again, I'm not saying anything about increasing or not increasing a minimum wage. I'm just saying we need to really look, to David's point, at a holistic approach to affordability in Tompkins County. And I think our friends in Albany need to do a much better job figuring out how to make New York State more affordable for individuals. And that could probably be another whole, 2-month forum that we could hold. But I think we're just getting started in this conversation, and I want to remind everybody, and to Legislator Packman's comments about keeping the conversation moving, right? I would say that within this committee, we need to keep the conversation around affordability and the levers that we can pull, right? Some of those are housing, some of those are business attraction, some of those are support for our workforce. There's many different ways that we can address this, and we need to continue to have a holistic conversation around that. I'm going to suggest and see if members of the committee would agree that Iris is co-chair of the committee, and I maybe sit down and can look at sort of a calendar or timeline over the next several months as to how we break this down into manageable, meaningful chunks in conversation to see which direction we want to go, and if there's appetite even to go in any direction, because that also needs to be asked first. I want those who are listening or reporting on this to know that this was an information intake and that there is no decision on the table at the moment. The only decision that we've made so far is to ask highly qualified and experienced experts to study this issue for us and present us with as much data and information as possible so that we could have it at our fingertips as a resource as we move forward in whatever conversation we have as it relates to wages in Tompkins County and a broader affordability issue at hand. So nothing is being done yet. Nothing has proposed to be done at this time. The only thing that we're, I think, committing to as members of this committee is to have more meaningful conversation rooted in data and, you know, community input, and to see which direction we want to move forward in over a period of time, because this is something that needs to be deliberate and methodical in our approach and not rush into, because of there's a lot of impact that this has positively or negatively or unknown at this time. So if members of the committee if we have some consensus around that approach, I would maybe ask that Iris and I could work offline to develop sort of a conversation strategy as to how we continue to keep this data part of the conversation within the committee. Iris, would that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. John, Adam, does that sound like a fair direction?
Yeah.
Okay. With that, I do want to wrap us up. Your 25 minutes became an hour and 20 minutes, but we've been known to do that to topics. But we wanted to make sure we had room on the agenda for this, as it's an incredibly important topic. And again, thank you. We look forward to maybe a bridged presentation at the full legislature, and encourage our colleagues to watch this for, you know, a full snapshot, and then receiving the final report and submittal, and going from there. And we'll make sure that it's available and accessible to the public, and that information is published out, and that we message that as well, so that nobody feels like we didn't get them the information. So Ian and David, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we have a draft report that you all are reviewing, and there are some revisions to some corrections we made to numbers. Also, we got around a revise and resubmit from a legislator, Judith. Yeah, so just look forward to your suggested revisions.
Yeah, I mean, personally, for me, and I don't know about how other legislators feel, it's your work, it's your research. If there's anything that stands out as known to be, you know, factually inaccurate, or like, that's where I would come from. But other than that, this is your work product, and I would accept personally, I would accept your work product and submission as a data point in the conversation. I wouldn't expect anything from me. I don't know if other legislators feel like they want to weigh in, but I do think it's important that we've given the other legislators opportunity if they decide, and if you don't hear from anybody, say by the end of the week, then, you know, our comment period should be closed.
Okay, so the end of the week, I'll send the revised version based on whatever corrections you all have.
Yeah.
And then that'll be the public report. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. David, thanks for joining remotely. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, we're making good time, but we do have still two other items. Next up on the agenda is Jen Gregory. You can come on up. Jen is the Executive Director of Southern Tier 8, our regional board. Full disclosure, I do chair that board, so I get to see Jen quite a bit. Our Commissioner of Planning and Sustainability, Katie Bergala, is also on that board, and Kurt Foreman, who is the President of Ithaca Area Economic Development, are the three appointees from Tompkins County. ST8 is made up of 8 counties, 8 counties that all have 3 representatives, typically somebody from their economic development organization, planning department, and elected official or legislator. Some are board of supervisors. So I'll turn it over to Jen to give a little bit of an update. One of the other things too is ST8 is an organization that the county through the planning department's budget pays dues to be a member of, and that allows us to have access to different funding opportunities that Jen can talk about in a little bit more detail. So we do have some items submitted, a few slides, and it looks like maybe I stole some of the thunder there, but I'll turn it over, Jen, to you to give an introduction and your presentation.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for having me this morning, everyone. Very interesting conversation. I was glad I was scheduled at this time. Yeah. Do you have control of the slides to bring up?
I don't. We have them in front of us or in our agenda packet.
Okay, great.
So I don't know. Do you need a copy?
No, let me grab my phone though,
right.
Because I have it on my laptop. So one is just general, so you know who we are. So as Greg said, we're one of 10 regional boards in New York State. The 8 stands for the 8 counties, covering here from Tompkins to Schoharie County. It's about 580,000 people. What that does is give some leverage in some of these more difficult conversations that we can convene partners and raise these issues. As you see mentioned in there, yes, thank you. Prioritizing the federal investments and bringing dollars to help with some of these challenging issues. The federal partners that we work with directly, they are the Appalachian Regional Commission, so ARC, you may have heard that around, as well as U.S. Commerce Economic Development Administration. Those programs are focused on workforce development, infrastructure, some community care programs as well. Recovery to Work has been a strong program in the area over the last few years as well. And then we provide this opportunity by bringing those partners together, an opportunity for education and networking for policies that are that our communities are looking at as the southern tier of New York State. So your slide for key investments, I wanted to list a few. I giggle when I see this because, and these are not all of the recent investments, that's also included in the return on investment for the annual county dues. But what has been key to some of those that I have heard feedback from, Ithaca College and the Physician Assistant Program, that's already made a tremendous impact, not just in local employers, but across the southern tier as well. To give you an idea of the broad range that we have, that program as well as TC3, some of the programs not only in healthcare but with tourism, the farmers market shared kitchen that allowed them to get the final project completed there for $100,000. Finger Lakes Reuse Center, they had a successful project. They're looking at pursuing another project. That has had a huge impact on your neighboring counties as well. It's really impressive what they've been able to do. Ithaca Area Economic Development. So during the early pandemic, 2022, we were able to put together a portfolio, work with a group out of Cincinnati of, these are developable properties in opportunity zones, a federal program to reduce risk for investment. That initial launch, as many of you know, that was picked up by a firm out of Philadelphia for investment of Southworks, and we've been nibbling away at that to, one, assess the infrastructure, put in the improvements, and now that has a large investment from the state. The strategic operations plan, you all know that much better than I do, of the improvements that Katie's made. And I will bring up, oh, thank you, the direct to work too. That's been another program with Department of Labor and Appalachian Regional Commission. That's been huge to bring a lot of folks coverage to get into the workplaces as well. Currently, these are listed there for other initiatives as well, tied into one that is launching this month with Trust of Public Lands to look at planning also for recreational outdoor use as well, and rural health technical assistance to those struggling operations in rural communities. How do they increase their bottom line as well? Can I just scroll up? Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to take some time too to share, thank you to Katie for serving as chair on our regional workforce housing initiative. What we're looking at, and you've been dealing with this challenge longer than anyone, when you see those commuting numbers, those are close. You know, you're within 10,000 commuting of what some of our rural counties have as their entire population. That's a lot. So, and we know this has been a challenge for my working career of 30 years, we're seeing this. So some programs are very well established, but how do we raise the awareness for these challenges across the southern tier? Planning for some investments that may come in with the initiative of Micron, with New Energy New York. We said, okay, how do we take some of these good practices that are established, scale them, and what are we missing at that's offered in other parts of the U.S., quite frankly? And is there the possibility to what the state has done with Hudson Valley, with Micron, with housing funds, what would be appropriate for our area to say we could use help with? Going beyond, there's a lot of initiatives for affordable housing. Going beyond that, how do we bring those investments here and promote that scalability? So we don't have, quite frankly, what we've seen over the last 30 years. We may have one project in this community and then 3 years in another. So how do we bring that workforce where they can say, okay, here, now we're going to put our employees to cover these projects over the next 5 years or decade. So that's the hope of what we're working on. We brought in some national experts under the name of Community Scale that have helped projects out west and in North Carolina. There's more to follow on that. Right now they're talking with more lenders and developers across the region, and we'll have some reports to come forward that will hopefully be less challenging than what we heard this morning by the end of the year. Thank you. With that, I also wanted to offer some of the networking opportunities too, because we hear these issues. I go out and I talk to folks in the community, our staff does. I think it's important for everyone to get together and also have the opportunity to have those discussions. So we have set up, we have a grant training. If you remember back in March, ARC came up from Washington. That was an invite for all 13 states. They had several areas, so we had over 200 people in the conference center. Every quarter we meet with workforce development, economic development, and planning scheduled. We have the developers conference scheduled in November, as I mentioned, and we're trying to put together a data center trip to just south of the border in Pennsylvania. That's affordable to get to, and they have over 15 permits in one county that they're looking at. I saw last week there was a nice rally here with a lot of attention that looks like that gathered. So there will be more to come out of that. I am basing the schedule on your planning directors because I think it's most lucrative that they're there. So getting that schedule for the 8 planning directors this fall, that will determine when that will be held. That's an update about where we're at. We were impacted by the federal financing changes So we were low on staff. That funding has been restored this year. So I anticipate adding at least one more staff person, if not two, and then we'll be more accessible to put these projects together. Oh, sure. So the return on investment. So what you will see, thank you, Katie, as you're looking at the budget, for our costs for this year, we have elevated the investment of federal programs in this region significantly. With that, we need to meet the match on those federal programs. The way we do that is share the cost across the counties to meet that match rate of hard cash dollars of around 25% to that cost. So this year I have asked all of the counties to increase their dues by about 20%. What does that mean? It's just under $2,000 that we're asking for that cost, with a 3-year projection of, in 2029, the cost to increase under $500. So the county board, the finance committee, they looked at this. We probably had, I don't know, 3 or 4 meetings we've been talking about this. And we've been able, because I was fairly conservative, I guess I would say, on hiring staff and our ability, we have a good reserve fund to catch us in some of these points. So we'll be taking some funds from that as well to cover this increase. I realize this is a cost to every county as you're looking at affordability. So that's where we felt a comfortable touch point was for that. The return for that, of what that looks at over the last 5 years, for every dollar that you spend, you're getting $14,000 back in return is the average for those investments.
So Jen, I think it's important to note too, just so members of the committee and the public know, the finance committee of ST8 is made up of all of the elected officials, the 8 elected officials sit on that board. So the ones mostly involved with decision-making as it relates to the budget within their respective counties, knowing that it typically comes through the request from their planning department. So part of the conversation is there an appetite for this investment? What's the return on investment? That's something that we talk across all 8 counties pretty significantly. And then go to the planning directors and say, you know, can you work this in somewhere? Does it seem like it makes sense? I think it's important that 1 to 14,000 over the last 5 years, Tompkins County has invested through our partnership with ST8 about $68,000. And we've brought in more than $9.9 million into the community through ARC, EDA, Department of Labor investments. That's a big number, right? We talk about this a lot during the budget season of, you know, grant writers or, you know, those type of things. How can we be trying to bring more money in? This is an organization that when partnered with, they have staff and the capacity to be tracking these things, to administer these grant programs, and for $22,000 a year is a pretty low threshold, in my opinion, for the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in certain years that we can bring into the community for economic development, for job creation, for housing capacity, for planning capacity, which if you hear our planning commissioner talk about, you know, capacity and work plan is something that is always needing reinvestment. And so I think it's, I think this is a good thing, and it's something that we should be supportive of. I do want to give members of the committee an opportunity to maybe ask Jen about ARC, EDA, Department of Labor. One of the challenges that Jen's organization has is, you know, the grant administration and the timing of some grant funding. And luckily, like any grant-based organization, the need to manage cash flow based on, you know, potential use of reserves and those type of things is important because the federal and state government and other partners are not always quick to pay their awards, and there's costs that are incurred up into that point. But I just wanted to give folks an opportunity to understand, what does it mean to be part of the Appalachian Regional Commission? Where does that money come from? How is it broken up? How is it divvied up? Those kind of things, if anyone is curious. If members of the committee are not, that's totally fine. But throwing it out there is a potential, something for Jen to hit on if folks are interested. But I would turn it over to you all for questions. Iris?
I'm curious about, for the projects that you support that are like building projects, first, this is going back to the key investments, but the IAED direct to work pathways to employment, is that the pathways to apprenticeship?
Yes.
Okay, the pre-apprenticeship.
Combined with the union program that was started 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's a fantastic program. I'm excited that I was able to go to the graduation. It was great.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, some of these, so I've been with the regional board for a number of years, in this role for 10 years. Some of these projects, that is a great project to see. We'll have a lot of the initial work done, and to see this rolling out and continuing for real feet on the ground, it's something for the community to be very proud of.
Yeah.
So Iris, that started as a direct to work, was like pathways to manufacturing jobs. And then it sort of morphed into Tompkins Build as a second sort of set cohort, and the manufacturing sort of contingent has paused because of the success and popularity of the Tompkins Build, so trying to direct those resources. But that was really a direct appeal by the legislature for the investment that we make in the Ithaca area economic development to do more around workforce and job creation, and not just around retention and attraction of employers, but really building the skill set for trades and manufacturing, which are two sectors that at the point in time when we had that discussion needed a workforce the most.
Yeah.
Katie?
I would just add that I think that $1.2 million investment, which we got through STA, really launched that whole program and allowed it to kick off in a great way. So, yeah.
Iris?
Yeah, I was curious about some of the building projects, like the farmers market, well, I don't know about reuses, that was construction, but the Southworks projects, are some of those, because there's federal funds, are those also covered by like Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements?
Yes, they are, and BABA requirements as well. And likely what you will see is some more training that we'll be hosting for that. The any federal grant program follows the CFR 200 code for regulations. That major overhaul with new guidance was released in May. There were more comments received in that change than any historically since they've been receiving comments. They're trying to push those through in October. So the really nice part about ARC is having that federal partner. They often, they host more trainings on that than I see in other areas of New York State. Sometimes I'll even challenge our folks north of the border in Syracuse a little bit because it's hands-on. With that program, we go through annual audits as well. So we look really at in the weeds of what those requirements are.
Thank you.
Sure.
Adam?
I guess I'm just, I'm a little curious about the Southern Tier Brownfields Assessment Coalition.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's one I just skimmed over. So we were just awarded that with Tompkins and at Otsego as partners on that. What that does is that opens up that fund amount for initial assessments. So you have to, under brownfields and those laws, you have to go under environmental reviews. So this is a dedicated fund for those projects and areas that you'd like to review in those areas to get funding to support consultants to do those reviews and move toward the approvals of being able to renovate and remodel those buildings, tear downs. And our focus, what we're looking at really are new housing developments as well as what we had looked at, but that could fall in the industrial development areas as well, similar to a Southworks. At a much smaller scale. I think that's the largest that I would anticipate in my career across the region.
Have we gotten any takers yet?
This was just awarded this summer, so we don't have the contract yet. We're anticipating that to be finalized the December, January timeframe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jen? Katie, anything that you want to add as well? I mean,
Well, I would just add that you will see this line item is in the planning department's budget. I believe it's $18,000, and as Jen said, just slightly more than, or less, right around $2,000 increase from last year's. And so I would just encourage you, if you have any questions, to ask Jen. She's the expert on this topic. I will try to field them at the budget presentation, but yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you don't mind asking now, I'm curious how, what does the 18,000 do and why the increase? I'm not saying it's not acceptable. I'm just curious.
Sure. So we meet with any grant, many grant programs. There's a match requirement that's coming from our federal partners. We've increased the amount of funding from the feds so much with the request that we needed to increase the match. And so split by the 8 counties, that's what that dollar amount is. That's projected out 3 years as well. So I don't anticipate coming back in 3 years for a big increase like this. Personally, this allows me to hire an additional staff person, and it's not my goal to keep hiring. I'd like to keep that in a manageable amount. Our county planning partners are actively engaged daily with what we do. So that really leverages all of those. The dues are important because for 50 years, ARC would write the check in January to the 74 local development districts that are in the region. Under DOGE, under the new guidelines, we're now looking at June or July, and now everything is reimbursement. So that was just approved yesterday, one of 20 out of the 74. So we're anticipating payment very soon, but that allows us to have our cash flow available in the beginning of the year. And then for that reimbursement later in the year.
And it's highly leveraged, right? Like for $1, you get $14,000.
It's really silly. I will share, not that you have a choice in any of this based on your geography, but we are the best value in New York State is what I've heard. Our other regional boards, they didn't have, in our area was impacted a lot of downsizing 30 years ago. So the legislative bodies, the decisions that had to be made, they saw everything leaving. They didn't see that opportunity. So they didn't raise dues from before I was born until like 5 years ago. And then I said, okay, folks, we have to look at a little more than 10,000 or I'm not going to be able to do a lot with me, myself, and I. But our neighboring Board of Central, they get $100,000 a year from their counties in dues. So I think it's a good value for what we can do. Granted, and they're structured very differently. They only have the 3 counties. But yeah, when you look at the numbers, that's what I giggle sometimes when I look at this because I'm like, well, there's a lot of projects here and there's a lot of money. It's math.
Yeah.
I think too, when we talk about hiring, there's an element of capacity building, you know, as a board member looking at succession planning and building the strength of an organization. Hiring is not something that ST8 does. I mean, it's a very small, lean staff, a very lean operation. But there does come a point where you have to think about the next chapter and institutional knowledge and trying to have some overlap and things like that. So that's why one, being able to just administer the number of grants that, you know, Jen, her team, and our really county planning and economic developers are putting together and bringing in, and the collaboration that they have, it's a lot. You know, we hear about grant administration and the cost and having to hire consultants to administer grant programs and things like that. This is a really good ROI to have an economic development consultant essentially working with our planning department and economic developers to bridge the gap and open access to the ARC funding. Katie, and then we'll wrap it up if there's no other questions.
Yeah, just very quickly. It's also the kind of intrinsic value that Jen brings to convening. She pulls all of the county planning directors together. She pulls the economic development people together so that they can have facilitated conversations to look for opportunities to partner and what the main issues are we should be focusing on. So I've found those personally very valuable.
Jen, thank you for making the trip all the way from another part of Appalachia.
Thank you.
But appreciate all your effort and work, and our thanks to the team at ST8 for all that they do as well.
Thank you for your partnership.
All right, thanks, Jen. All right, last on the agenda, and we have a few minutes left to do that. I'm going to ask David West from our Planning and Sustainability Department to come up. I'm going to go ahead and move this so that we can start. Pardon?
Technically not on the agenda.
Technically not on the agenda, yes, but we had no objection to adding it previously, so it technically now is. But it says not on the agenda on your page. Love a good Robert's Rule discussion at 11:51 a.m. on a Wednesday. So this is resolution number ID 14306, support for the Department of Planning and Sustainability to use budgeted funds for housing target market. And I would so move. Seconded by John Hunt. David, I'll give a little bit of a legislative background to maybe how these funds showed up, and then you can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. Back in the last budget cycle, we have our housing study, and there was a request from the planning department for about $25,000 to the legislature through that process. And in that process, Legislator John had made a recommendation to go back to the IDA and see if they would be willing to support an additional $25,000 to their already $50,000 contribution that they were making to partner with us on this study. Members of the IDA, which there's 3 legislators on, agreed to increase from $50,000 to $75,000. In that process, there was never an amendment to the budget that was presented to remove this $25,000 from the budget. So when the final budget was adopted, this $25,000 was left in the Department of Planning and Sustainability's budget. With that being said, we are fully funded through the IDA's contribution and then also the CDBG block grant, right?
Correct.
For our housing study that's currently in the infancy stages of getting underway. So that's fully funded. So this $25,000 showed up as an opportunity. Katie and David approached myself as chair and the leadership of the legislature and asked about the resolution we have before us. We felt it was best that it work its way through the appropriate committee process, and we have a discussion here. So that brings us to today. I will remind everyone that there are only so many levers that we can pull as legislators in a county that doesn't have land use control, and this is one of them. And as we talk about housing affordability, this is something that's needed in the first phase of that, my personal opinion and statement. I'll turn it over to David to make the request and ask that's in the resolution.
Great, thank you, Greg. You explained it perfectly. This is an amount that is in our budget, and you don't usually hear a department coming to ask permission to spend money in their budget, but because of the kind of circuitous process, we thought it was best to be as transparent as possible. Target market analysis is something that is specifically useful for new walkable neighborhoods, something that is supported by our comp plan, but also that a lot of our municipal partners are working on. In particular, the town of Ithaca and town of Dryden have quite recent master plans for neighborhoods, and the town of Ithaca submitted a letter of support with this because they are investing heavily in what's called a generic environmental impact statement, which looks deeply at their South Hill traditional neighborhood development proposal. And essentially, with a GEIS, you do all of the advanced environmental review so that then the project can move very smoothly in the future within the parameters that are reviewed. And a next step to getting to shovels in the ground is including a really thorough understanding of the specific market for this kind of housing product, which is a bit different than, just typical suburban subdivisions or downtown high-rise apartments. Having a complete mixed-use compact neighborhood is a different kind of market, and it's something we don't have, so we really need specialists in that kind of development to understand how many homes could be absorbed in a year, what kind of price points they could achieve that would justify their cost of construction, and also to help the municipalities understand how they can intelligently phase this, because any project of this scale is going to be somewhat of a public-private partnership. There's going to need to be water, wastewater, extensions, laterals, and this work could help inform that specifically for the South Hill TND, but also be useful for the other locations that that kind of development is considered in the county.
So before we jump into questions, I do want to remind folks, just for context, for legislators among us and also others, about some county policy. Unused funds in a department's budget do not roll over to next year. They roll back to our general fund, or unallocated fund balance, essentially, is where they get deposited into. The request would need to come to legislature for approval because of the dollar amount, correct? In this, or no?
No.
No, to be clear, we didn't need to come to the legislature.
Yes.
It felt like the right thing to do because
correct.
it was an oversight.
Yes. And we are having a discussion, and we've had many discussions at the legislative level about not using fund balance moving forward to keep the tax levy in check, right? So some of the comments around how can we spend $25,000 in a year where it's a tough budget year. This money has already been levied and allocated. It's in the department's hands, and it's not going to reduce the levy or operating expenses in a future year if goes unspent. It literally just goes into the county savings account, for lack of a better term. And so I think it's important to have those ideas in mind, that this is not a way to move money forward to help reduce operating burden in future years. And this would likely be the beginning step of what's needed to grow our base and to grow our housing stock, which is what we're having a lot of conversation around right now. We need to grow our tax base, and we need to grow our housing stock for sale, for rent, across all market segments. So with that caveat, you can tell where I'm going to land on this one. But John, and then others for questions. Go ahead, John.
Hi, I noticed that the location is very close to the edge of my district at 96B and East King, and I'm just curious which corner and property is being looked at.
So the town's comprehensive plan looks at that entire intersection, but most of the available land for development would be on the northeast corner.
Right, that looks like just an open field there.
Exactly.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Iris?
Yeah, a few questions. I mean, I definitely support trying to build more housing. I'm curious because from their letter, it says that they've already retained a firm to begin the process. So would this analysis happen anyway if we don't fund it?
No.
And if they don't have this analysis done, then can the project still move forward?
This would need to be a next step. So by funding it now, we kind of are keeping things rolling. Otherwise, they would have to figure out after the GEIS is done. I think this will also help make the GEIS better, having better numbers up front, because that's, one of the initial questions is, what are the phases and how do they lay out? And for understanding the way a GEIS works, you're really looking at the impacts at the end when it's all developed. So you don't need to know the phases, but it's better if you do.
Okay, and I'm familiar with that area. Is this going to be like Chase Farms, kind of like that, sort of a walkable neighborhood? So if you go up Chase Lane, like I think it was built in the 90s or 80s.
This would be, I guess, what would be most similar that exists. It would be like a traditional village. So if you think about Trumansburg.
Like a whole village.
Yeah.
Not as big as a whole village. But.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main parcel is close to 100 acres.
Okay, so it's not just housing, they want to do commercial and...
It would have a small main street.
Oh, wow.
The initial designs they have a village square at the center, flanked by Main Street with mixed use, townhouses, and then single family homes.
Okay, and I know this was developed years ago. I'm wondering how, now that we have the Southworks development just a short ways down the road from there, like, what the thought is there around like commercial viability, given that Southworks is also planning to have a lot of retail and restaurants and things.
So I think there is already a commercial core there. There's a cafe, the furniture store, a hotel, and a gas station there. I think, the potential is for a little bit more, a couple, maybe a restaurant, some barber shops, that kind of, it's going to be small scale retail, it's not a replacement for downtown. It's a kind of neighborhood serving center.
And how many units are they thinking about for housing?
That's one of the things that this would help drive, but it's in the hundreds.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I would just add that I just was looking on the Town of Ithaca's website, and they have a whole page on traditional neighborhood development with examples from around the country of the types of what that might look like.
And there's videos of the charrette process that they use to develop the current plan.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then the timing, do we have a sense of when they would be shovel ready, like actually break ground on this?
In the next couple of years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the GEIS, I expect, will be done next year. This process, the market study is fairly quick. It would take 3 months. So that puts them in a great position once the GIS is part of the town's rezoning. So the town has a system where you can choose within the places that they say they want a new neighborhood to create a series of zones that build out that neighborhood. So it's not one zone because you really want a neighborhood to have a variety of densities in close proximity to each other. So you go through this process with the community that they have already started, and the end result of that is a rezoning action that puts those zones down, and then they would be seeking a developer. And I think they'd be in a really good position to seek a developer because they'd be fully entitled, have all the environmental out of the way, and have a strong market study.
Do we have any ability to make recommendations about some of that? Like, for example, workforce housing, harkening back to the conversation from the previous presenter. Is there a way for us to say, like, we'd really love to see that, some of this is targeted for certain groups?
I think that is in line with what they have been wanting to see. You can do whatever you want, but I'm not sure it would be super helpful to tie that to the study. The study will look at, what the combination of construction costs and incomes locally and anyone who might move could pay for. So it's really driven by those financial realities.
Okay. Because I know there's a large need for example, like single level homes for people to age in place. And we just don't have that. And if that was part of this, that would be really fantastic.
So one of the things, sorry.
That I think it ultimately will be, the town of Ithaca's decision with land use authority. This just provides a breadth of information that they could bring to the landowner could bring to a bank to start getting financing rolling, to get a developer that is the type of developer that will most likely succeed in the town of Ithaca. But I agree with David, tying this study in some ways, I think is doing a disservice to the project, because if you do want a truly mixed-use development with mixed incomes and everything, you do need to look at the entire landscape.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And what we do know about our demographics is that seniors are our fastest growing age cohort. I think everything points to that would be a great part of the market for this. And then the question that this analysis can help is, where are those people who could afford to pay for new construction and would like to have that particular product? Are they looking for 1,200 square feet? Are they looking for 800 square feet? What is the product that is possible?
And this, I think, is, a piece. And in our housing strategy, that's an area where we'll have data. And then also the county has an opportunity to sort of weigh into priorities, right? And have that conversation around, here's what the data shows, here's what we'd like to see, more of, here's what we need to see more of, here's what then we could also incentivize in the future, right? And I think for me, the benefit of investing in this type of study is something I don't believe the county's really invested in before or had the opportunity to invest in a project. And for a project to be successful, and what I think smart communities do is they package parcels and say, here's what we want, here's what's approved, here's the data that supports it, now come and build it, right? And those are, there's only a few parcels that we have of size and scale across the county, right? I know there's 100+ acre, the Leonardo parcel in Dryden, there's this one in Ithaca, and there's a couple throughout the county. But this, I think, could be a model for us to say, like similar to our Housing and Supportive Infrastructure Fund, which towns and villages have access to apply for through the planning department. This could be another way that the legislature could invest in, a municipal driven project that gets us to our goal in really a true public-private partnership that doesn't necessarily revolve around the tax abatement conversation or those type of things. This is planning at its core and essential to be able to market to a large-scale developer, which we don't have many of in this area, and we would, likely need to attract some sort of national builder or firm that's essentially equipped to be able to build out planned communities like this one. Katie.
I don't think it was mentioned, but this initial investment of $25,000 in the specific area we've been talking about would also open the doors for other municipalities to purchase one of these studies for areas that they would like to see developed for much, much lower costs of $8,000 and less.
Yeah, I saw that. I was wondering if that meant that other municipalities or the town would come back and be like, can you also fund the 8,500? And
this just gets the initial data set essentially in the consultant's hands, right? They do the initial groundwork, and then what they can do from there is split out and parcel at like a, it's like buy one, get the next several at a discounted rate because we've already done the groundwork required.
Just my last technical question on the budget is this 25 that's sort of extra or that wasn't used by your department that we now find ourselves with to be able to spend, is that then also baked into next year's budget?
No, it was a one-time funding that just simply, through an oversight, wasn't removed from the budget. And we saw this opportunity, so before we just rolled it into general fund, we thought we should let the legislature make this decision.
Great, thank you.
With no other questions, are we prepared to take a vote? Okay, so the vote on this would be to accept, and then this would move forward to the full legislature at the next legislature meeting. All those in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you for being a model department and you know, showing us when we have some oversight and some found money. We always love found money. So thank you both for the work on this, and I hopefully will have support amongst the full legislature, and this will be a great project for the town of Ithaca. Any committee member reports? Okay, well, seeing none, and there's no further business before this body, it is 12:09, and we'll stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.